My house was destroyed by a tornado, so I went to my son's place. He said, "We want privacy. My girlfriend doesn't want you here." So I called my old high school love, a self-made millionaire. Nobody knew I still had his number. When he showed up and said 3 words, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." My name is Wanda, and at 67 years old, I thought I had seen every kind of heartbreak life could throw at me. I was wrong. The tornado sirens started wailing at 3:15 in the afternoon on a Tuesday that began like any other. I was in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd raised my son Marcus, preparing my usual afternoon tea. The weatherman had mentioned possible storms, but in Oklahoma, that was nothing new. We'd weathered dozens of them over the years. I should have paid more attention to the warnings. The wind picked up faster than I'd ever seen before. Within minutes, the sky turned an ominous green-black color that made my stomach clench with fear. I grabbed my emergency radio and heard the words that would change everything. Large tornado on the ground moving northeast toward Meebrook subdivision. That was my neighborhood. I had maybe 10 minutes to gather what I could. My hands shook as I threw photo albums, important documents, and a few pieces of jewelry into a suitcase. 43 years of memories, and I could only save what fit in one bag. The wedding photo of Harold and me, Marcus's baby, pictures my mother's pearl necklace. Everything else would have to stay. The basement felt different that day, colder, more final. I huddled in the corner, clutching Harold's old sweater, listening to what sounded like a freight train tearing through my world above. The house groaned and creaked, fighting against forces far stronger than the sturdy frame Harold had been so proud of when we bought it in 1980. Then came the silence. That awful, hollow silence that means everything you knew is gone. When I finally climbed those basement steps, my legs barely held me up. Where my living room used to be, there was sky. Just open sky and debris scattered like confetti after a cruel celebration. The kitchen table where Marcus used to do his homework was embedded in what remained of the garage wall. My rose garden, the one I'd tended for 20 years, looked like it had been put through a blender. I stood there in the ruins of my life, still wearing Harold's sweater, and cried for the first time since his funeral 8 years ago. The neighbors who were lucky enough to still have houses took me in that first night. Sweet Mrs. Patterson from next door insisted I stay with her, but her place was damaged too, and she had her own family to worry about. The Red Cross set up shelters, but the thought of sleeping in a gymnasium full of strangers made me feel even more lost than I already was. That's when I knew I had to call Marcus. My son lives about 45 minutes away in Tulsa, in a nice neighborhood with tree-lined streets and houses that all look like they belong in magazines. He'd moved there 5 years ago when he got promoted to regional manager at the insurance company. We weren't close, not the way mothers and sons are supposed to be, but he was all the family I had left. I used Mrs. Patterson's phone because mine was somewhere under what used to be my bedroom. My hands trembled as I dialed his number, a number I'd memorized but rarely used unless it was his birthday or Christmas. "Marcus, honey, it's Mom." My voice sounded smaller than I intended. "Mom, what's wrong? You sound upset." "The tornado hit the house, sweetheart. It's gone. Everything's gone." There was a pause that felt like forever. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm okay, but I need somewhere to stay while I figure things out. Just temporarily." Another pause. "Of course, Mom. Of course. Come over, we'll figure this out." The relief that washed over me was so strong I nearly collapsed. My son would take care of me. Despite all our distance, all the missed calls and awkward holiday dinners, he was still my boy. I spent the next morning sorting through what could be salvaged from the debris. The insurance adjuster, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, walked through what remained of my home with a clipboard and a camera. "Total loss," he said, matter-of-factly, as if those 2 words didn't represent my entire life. How much, I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Well, you had a $120,000 policy on the structure, but with your deductible and depreciation, you're looking at maybe $90,000, maybe less. 90,000 to rebuild 43 years of life. It seemed impossible. Mrs. Patterson helped me pack what little I'd managed to save into her car. 3 garbage bags of clothes that smelled like mud and disaster. 1 suitcase of photographs and documents, and Harold's toolbox that somehow survived in the garage. That was it. That was all I had left of the life I'd built. The drive to Marcus's house felt like traveling to a foreign country. Everything looked different when you had nowhere to go back to. The familiar landmarks, the gas station where I always bought my lottery tickets, the diner where Harold and I used to have breakfast on Sundays, they all seemed to belong to someone else's life now. Marcus's neighborhood was untouched by the storm. Perfect lawns, perfect driveways, perfect lives continuing exactly as they had the day before. I felt like an intruder carrying my disaster with me into their pristine world. His house was a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a red door that Sophia, his girlfriend, had picked out. I'd met her exactly 3 times in the 2 years they'd been together. She was 32 to his 41, worked at some marketing firm downtown, and had opinions about everything from the color of the walls to what kind of wine to serve at dinner. I parked Mrs. Patterson's car in their driveway and sat there for a moment, gathering my courage. This was temporary, I told myself. Just until I could figure out what came next. Just until the insurance money came through, and I could find a small apartment somewhere. I never imagined that walking up to my son's front door with my 3 bags of belongings would be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But as I raised my hand to knock, I felt a familiar sensation. The same hollow feeling I'd had when Harold died, like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. I just didn't know yet how much further I was about to fall. Marcus opened the door before I could knock, like he'd been watching from the window. For just a moment, seeing his familiar face, Harold's eyes, my stubborn chin made me feel like everything might be okay. He was my son, my only child. Surely blood meant something. Mom. He stepped aside to let me in, but his voice held something I couldn't quite identify. Distance, maybe. Or discomfort. Sophia appeared behind him almost immediately, like she'd been waiting in the wings. She was wearing white jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. Her blonde hair was pulled back in one of those messy buns that somehow looked perfectly arranged, and her smile was the kind that never reached her eyes. "Wanda, how awful about your house," she said, but she was looking at my garbage bags, not at me. Marcus told me what happened. I set my bags down in their pristine entryway, suddenly aware of how I must look. My clothes still carried the smell of the disaster. Wet wood mud, and something else I couldn't name. Destruction, maybe loss. "It's just temporary," I said quickly. "Just until I can get back on my feet." Marcus and Sophia exchanged a look. One of those wordless conversations that couples have, the kind that excludes everyone else in the room. I'd seen Harold and me do the same thing countless times, but from the other side it felt like being shut out of a club I didn't know existed. "Let's sit down and talk," Marcus said, leading me into their living room. Their house was beautiful in the way magazine homes are beautiful. Everything matched. Nothing was out of place. White furniture that looked like no one had ever actually sat on it. Glass coffee tables that reflected the light from windows so clean they seemed invisible. It was the kind of home that made you afraid to touch anything. I perched on the edge of their pristine sofa, my muddy shoes planted firmly on their spotless hardwood floors. Sophia noticed and winced slightly. "So, what's the plan?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair across from me. Not next to me on the sofa where he could put his arm around his grieving mother, but across from me like we were conducting business. "Well, the insurance adjuster said it'll take a few weeks to process everything, maybe a month. I was hoping I could stay here until then, just until I find a small apartment or something." The silence that followed lasted about 10 seconds too long. I watched Sophia's face change, saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She reached over and placed her hand on Marcus's arm, a gesture that looked supportive but felt possessive. "Mom," Marcus started, and I knew from his tone that whatever came next would break my heart. "The thing is, Sophia and I have been talking and we really value our privacy here. We work long hours and this is our sanctuary, you know." I blinked, not understanding. "I wouldn't be in your way. I'd stay out of your hair, help with cooking, cleaning. I wouldn't be any trouble." Sophia leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "It's not about trouble, Wanda. It's about space. This house, it's our first home together and we're still finding our rhythm as a couple." "I'm his mother," I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. "Of course you are," Sophia replied smoothly. "And that's exactly why we think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere you can have your independence while you rebuild." I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to contradict her, to remember that I was the woman who'd sat up with him through every fever, who'd worked double shifts to pay for his college textbooks, who'd held his hand through his divorce 3 years ago when his ex-wife left him for her personal trainer. Instead, he nodded. "Sophia's right, Mom. We think you'd be happier with your own space." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my chest tighten like someone was squeezing my lungs. "Happier, Marcus. I lost everything yesterday. Everything. And you think I'd be happier alone in some motel room than here with my family?" "It doesn't have to be a motel," Sophia said quickly. "There are some lovely extended stay places near the mall. Very clean, very safe, and they have little kitchenettes so you could cook for yourself." I stared at her. This woman who'd been in my son's life for 2 years telling me where I should live after losing my home. And how exactly am I supposed to pay for this lovely extended stay place? "The insurance money won't come for weeks." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I could help with that. A few hundred to get you started." A few hundred? Like I was some distant relative he barely knew, not the woman who'd given him life. "Marcus," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I changed your diapers. I walked the floor with you when you had colic. I taught you to ride a bike and helped you with your homework, and held you when you cried over Sarah Jenkins breaking your heart in 7th grade. His face wrined slightly, but Sophia squeezed his arm tighter. "Nobody's questioning your history," she said. "We just think everyone would be more comfortable with some boundaries." Boundaries, I'd heard that word from the counselor Marcus had seen after his divorce. Everything was about boundaries. "Now you're kicking me out," I said flatly. "We're not kicking you out," Marcus protested. "We're just saying that maybe this arrangement wouldn't work for anyone." "Whose idea was this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could see it in the way Sophia sat back, slightly satisfied, like she'd won something. "We discussed it together," Marcus said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking in a way that reminded me I was 67 years old and alone in the world. "I see. Mom, don't be like this. We're trying to do what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. "What would be best for everyone?" "Marcus, is if your mother didn't have to sleep in her car tonight." Sophia's perfectly made-up face arranged itself into an expression of concern. "You don't have to sleep in your car. Like I said, there are options." I looked around their pristine living room one more time. At the family photos that included Marcus and Sophia, but none of me at the expensive furniture that no one was allowed to really live on. At my son who'd chosen this cold, beautiful woman over his own mother. "You're right," I said finally. "There are always options." I picked up my 3 garbage bags and Harold's toolbox, the weight of them seeming heavier now that I knew where I wasn't welcome. Marcus stood up, looking uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to change his mind. "I'll call you in a few days," he said. "Once you get settled somewhere." "Don't bother," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I wouldn't want to intrude on your sanctuary." Sophia had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but not enough to speak up. Not enough to say, Wait, this is wrong. She's your mother. I walked out of that perfect house with its perfect couple and their perfect boundaries, and sat in Mrs. Patterson's borrowed car for a long time before I could bring myself to start the engine. Through their front window, I could see Marcus and Sophia talking probably about how difficult I was being, how much drama I was bringing into their peaceful lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years after Harold died telling myself I was strong, independent, that I didn't need anyone. Now, when I actually needed help, I discovered that independence is a luxury you can only afford when you have choices. I drove to the Walmart parking lot and sat there as the sun went down, trying to figure out where a 67-year-old woman with $93 in her purse and 3 bags of tornado-damaged belongings was supposed to sleep. The car was getting cold, and I had maybe 2 hours before the security guard would notice me and ask me to move along. That's when I remembered the business card I'd been carrying in my wallet for almost 50 years, yellow with age and soft from being handled. A card I'd never thought I'd actually use from a boy I'd loved when the world was young and everything seemed possible. James Morrison, the boy who'd promised to come back for me someday before life got in the way, and someday never came. I pulled out my phone and stared at the faded numbers on the card, wondering if they were even still good. Wondering if he was even still alive. Wondering if I had the courage to find out. I spent 3 nights sleeping in that borrowed car before I found the courage to make the call. 3 nights of waking up with a crick in my neck and the taste of shame in my mouth. 3 nights of moving from parking lot to parking lot so security wouldn't notice the elderly woman living in her vehicle. 3 nights of using gas station bathrooms to wash my face and brush my teeth, avoiding eye contact with my reflection because I couldn't stand what I saw there. The business card felt like tissue paper between my fingers, worn soft from 5 decades of being carried but never used. James Morrison. It read in faded blue ink. Below that, a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize. On the back, in my own young handwriting, always remember W. I'd written those words when I was 17 years old, believing with the absolute certainty of youth that James Morrison would be the great love of my life. He was 18 with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of summer storms. He worked at his father's auto shop after school and dreamed of bigger things, of building something that mattered. We'd dated for 8 months, which at 17 felt like forever. He used to take me to the old quarry outside town, where we'd sit on the hood of his beat-up Chevy and talk about our plans. He was going to start his own business, he said. Something with construction maybe, or real estate. Something that would make him rich enough to give me everything I deserved. "I'm going to come back for you, Wanda," he'd promised the night before he left for college in California. "I'm going to make something of myself, and then I'm going to come back and marry you." But 17-year-old promises have a way of fading when real life takes over. He wrote letters, at first long, passionate letters full of dreams and plans. I wrote back, telling him about my secretarial classes, about my job at the bank, about how I was waiting for him just like I'd promised. Then the letters became shorter, less frequent. When I met Harold 6 months later at a church social, James felt like a beautiful dream I'd had once, too good to be real. Harold was steady, reliable, already 25 with a good job at the phone company. He didn't promise me the world, but he promised me a home, a family, security. When he proposed after 4 months of courtship, I said yes. I tucked James's business card into my wedding dress pocket, a secret talisman I couldn't quite bring myself to throw away. Now, 50 years later, sitting in a car that wasn't mine in a Walmart parking lot, I wondered what had become of that dreamy boy with the storm-colored eyes. I'd kept track of him sporadically over the years, the way you do with first loves. Through mutual friends, I'd heard he'd made good on his promises. Started a construction company that grew into something big. Never married, which surprised people. Too busy building his empire, they said. That Morrison boy always was ambitious. The last I'd heard, maybe 10 years ago, was that his company had expanded beyond Oklahoma into Texas and Arkansas. Morrison Development, building shopping centers and office complexes. The boy from the auto shop had become the kind of man who wore expensive suits and made decisions that affected hundreds of people. What would that man want with a 67-year-old widow sleeping in a borrowed car? The rational part of my brain said it was ridiculous, pathetic even. You don't call someone after 50 years because your life has fallen apart. You don't reach out to your teenage boyfriend when you're old and desperate and have nowhere else to turn. But rational thinking is a luxury when you're counting the quarters in your purse and trying to figure out if you have enough for a cup of coffee in a bathroom that locks. On the fourth morning, I couldn't take it anymore. My back ached from sleeping curled up in the front seat. My clothes smelled like the inside of a car, and I'd spent the last of my cash on a gas station sandwich that tasted like cardboard and despair. I sat in the McDonald's parking lot staring at the card, my hands shaking from more than just the morning cold. What would I say? Hi, James. Remember me? I'm homeless now. Can you help? The number on the card was probably disconnected, or it would ring to some secretary who would politely inform me that Mr. Morrison was far too important to take calls from random women claiming to know him from high school. But what if it wasn't? What if he answered? My heart pounded as I dialed the number, each digit feeling like a step off a cliff. It rang once, twice. Morrison Development. This is James. His voice deeper now, weathered by time and responsibility, but unmistakably his. After 50 years, I would have recognized that voice anywhere. I almost hung up, almost pressed the end call button, and drove away to figure out some other solution. But something in his tone, some warmth that seemed to reach through the phone and wrap around me like a blanket, made me speak. James. This is Wanda. Wanda Sullivan. Well, it's Wanda Peterson now, but it used to be Sullivan. Silence long enough that I thought maybe the call had dropped, or maybe he'd hung up, or maybe he had no idea who I was. Then Wanda, just my name spoken like a prayer or a wonder, like he couldn't quite believe it. I'm sorry to call you like this. I rushed on the words, tumbling over each other in my desperation to explain before he could hang up. I know it's been a long time and I probably shouldn't be calling, but I didn't know who else. Where are you? He interrupted, his voice sharp with concern. I'm in Tulsa. Well, sort of. I'm in a parking lot in Tulsa, and I know this sounds crazy, but my house was destroyed in the tornado last week, and my son, he doesn't want me to stay with him, and I don't have anywhere to go. The words came out in a rush, each one harder than the last to say. Admitting that your own child had turned you away was like admitting you'd failed at the most fundamental part of being human. Give me your location, James said, his voice all business now. I'm coming to get you. You don't have to do that. I don't know why I called. I guess I just needed to hear a friendly voice. Wanda, his tone broke. No argument. Tell me where you are. I'm already walking to my car. Through the phone, I could hear the sound of a door closing and engine starting. He was really coming. This man I hadn't spoken to in 50 years was dropping whatever important business he'd been conducting to rescue me from a McDonald's parking lot. I gave him the address, my voice barely above a whisper. James, I'm not the girl you remember. Neither am I, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. But I've been waiting 50 years for this call. After we hung up, I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours, alternating between panic and disbelief. What was I doing? What were we doing? This was insane. You couldn't just pick up relationships after 5 decades, like you were continuing a conversation from yesterday. But as I watched the entrance to the parking lot waiting for a car, I wouldn't recognize carrying a man who might not recognize me. I felt something I hadn't felt since the tornado sirens first started wailing. Hope. Maybe it was foolish hope. Maybe it would lead to more disappointment, more heartbreak, but it was hope nonetheless. And at 67 years old, with nothing left to lose, hope was worth the risk. At 11:37 exactly, a silver Lexus pulled into the parking lot, moving slowly like the driver was looking for something or someone. I watched through my windshield as the car approached my heart, hammering against my ribs like a bird trying to escape its cage. The windows were tinted so I couldn't see inside, but something deep in my chest told me this was him. The car stopped 3 spaces away from mine, and the driver's door opened. Even after 50 years, even with gray hair and lines around his eyes, even carrying the weight of decades I hadn't shared with him, I knew him immediately. James Morrison stepped out of that car like he was stepping out of my dreams. And when his eyes found mine through my windshield, the years collapsed between us like they'd never existed at all. James walked toward my car with the same easy confidence he'd had at 18. But now it was refined, polished by success and maturity. He wore dark jeans and a navy sweater that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. But his eyes, those storm gray eyes that had haunted my dreams for decades, were exactly the same. I wanted to hide, wanted to sink down in my seat and pretend this wasn't happening. I looked terrible. My hair hadn't been properly washed in 4 days. My clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in them, and I smelled like disappointment and desperation. But he was already at my car door, tapping gently on the window with a smile that made my heart skip like I was 17 again. I rolled down the window, suddenly unable to breathe. "Hello, Wanda," he said softly. Up close, I could see the changes time had made. His dark hair was silver now, cut short and professional. Lines mapped the corners of his eyes and bracketed his mouth. He was broader through the shoulders, more solid, like success had given him physical weight along with everything else. But when he smiled at me through that car window, I saw the boy who used to drive me to the quarry and tell me about his dreams. "Hi," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. He studied my face for a long moment, those gray eyes taking in every detail. I wanted to apologize for how I looked, for how far I'd fallen for calling him after all these years with nothing to offer but problems. Instead, he said 3 words that changed everything. "You look beautiful." I started crying. Right there in that McDonald's parking lot with James Morrison standing beside my borrowed car. I broke down completely. 50 years of held-back tears. 4 days of sleeping rough. A lifetime of being told I wasn't enough. It all came pouring out in ugly, gasping sobs that I couldn't control. He didn't say anything else. Didn't try to shush me or tell me everything would be okay. He just opened my car door, helped me out, and wrapped his arms around me while I fell apart against his chest. He smelled like expensive cologne and clean laundry, like success and stability, like everything I'd lost and everything I'd never had. His sweater was soft against my cheek, and his arms were strong around my shaking shoulders. "I'm sorry," I gasped against his chest. "I'm so sorry, James. I shouldn't have called. I shouldn't have dragged you into this mess." "Shh," he murmured, his hand stroking my back. "You should have called years ago." When the tears finally stopped, I pulled back to look at him, embarrassed by the wet spot I'd left on his expensive sweater. I must look like a disaster. He reached up and brushed a tear from my cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. "You look like someone who's been through hell and survived it." "That's not disaster, Wanda. That's strength." I laughed, but it came out shaky and bitter. Strength. I'm 67 years old, sleeping in a borrowed car because my own son doesn't want me. That's not strength. That's pathetic. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw a flash of the anger he was trying to hide. "Your son is an idiot. You don't know him." "I don't need to know him. I know you." He paused, his hands still resting gently on my shoulders. "Or at least I knew you. And the Wanda Sullivan I knew would never turn away someone in need, especially not family." The way he said my maiden name like it was something precious he'd been keeping safe all these years made my chest ache with longing for the girl I used to be. "That was a long time ago," I said. "I'm not that girl anymore." "Maybe not." He agreed. "But I'd like to get to know the woman she became." He helped me gather my pathetic belongings from the car. the 3 garbage bags, Harold's toolbox, my purse with its meager contents. If he was appalled by how little I had left, he didn't show it. He loaded everything into the back of his Lexus like my tornado-damaged clothes, and broken memories were precious cargo. "Where are we going?" I asked as he opened the passenger door for me. "Home," he said simply. The drive took 45 minutes winding through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until we reached an area I'd never seen before. Rolling hills dotted with estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. Trees that looked like they'd been professionally placed. Mailboxes that probably cost more than most people's cars. James turned into a long driveway marked only by a small brass placard that read, "Morrison." The driveway curved through mature oaks and manicured gardens before opening into a circular drive in front of a house that took my breath away. It wasn't ostentatious or showy. It was elegant in the way that real money is elegant. Understated, confident, built to last. Stone and timber with tall windows that caught the afternoon light, and a wraparound porch that invited you to sit and stay a while. James. I breathed, staring up at this monument to everything he'd accomplished. This is incredible. He parked the car but didn't get out immediately. Instead, he sat there looking at the house like he was seeing it through my eyes. "It's too big," he said quietly. "Always has been." I built it thinking I'd fill it someday, but he shrugged. A gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "Some dreams don't work out the way you plan. You never married." The question slipped out before I could stop it. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. Came close a few times, but there was always something missing. He said simply like it was the most obvious thing in the world. The word hung between us in the quiet car, loaded with 50 years of what-ifs and might-have been. I wanted to ask what he meant. Wanted to understand how I could have been missing from a life I'd never been part of. But before I could find the words, he was getting out of the car, coming around to open my door. The house was even more impressive inside. Hardwood floors that gleamed like honey ceilings that soared overhead furniture that looked like it belonged in architectural magazines, but it didn't feel cold or museum-like. There were books everywhere, comfortable reading chairs positioned near windows, photos scattered on side tables. It felt like a home where someone actually lived, not just a showcase for success. "Are you hungry?" James asked, leading me into a kitchen that was bigger than my entire living room had been. "I was just about to make lunch when you called." I realized I was starving. The gas station sandwich from yesterday felt like a week ago, and my stomach was cramping from emptiness and nerves. "I don't want to be any trouble," I started, but he cut me off with a look. "Wanda, stop. You're not trouble. You're—" He paused, searching for words. "You're the answer to a question I've been asking for 50 years. While he cooked, and he could actually cook, moving around that enormous kitchen with the ease of someone who'd learned to take care of himself. I studied the photographs scattered around the room. James at groundbreaking ceremonies, cutting ribbons, shaking hands with important-looking people. James with various women at charity galas and business dinners, always smiling, but never looking quite complete. "Tell me about your life," he said, setting a plate of perfectly grilled chicken and roasted vegetables in front of me. "Tell me about Harold, about your son, about everything I missed." So I did. Over a lunch that tasted like heaven after days of gas station food, I told him about my marriage to Harold. Steady, comfortable Harold who'd given me security and companionship, if not passion. About Marcus the baby. I'd wanted so desperately and loved so fiercely, who'd grown up to be a stranger who valued his girlfriend's comfort over his mother's needs. I told him about the years of being a good wife, a good mother, a good widow. About the tornado that had taken everything I owned, and the sun who'd taken everything I had left. James listened without interrupting, his gray eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. I'm sorry about Harold, about your house, about your son. But I'm not sorry you called me. Why? The question came out smaller than I intended. He reached across the table and took my hand in his. Still strong, still gentle, still capable of making my heart race after all these years. Because I never stopped loving you, he said quietly. Because every business deal I made, every success I achieved, every dollar I earned, it was all so I could be worthy of you when you came back to me. James, I know it sounds crazy. I know 50 years is a long time and we're different people now. But when I heard your voice on that phone today, it was like the missing piece of my life finally clicked into place. I stared at our joined hands, his tanned and manicured minework worn and showing every day of my 67 years. I'm not the girl you remember. No, he agreed. You're better. You're real. You've lived and loved and lost and survived. That 17-year-old girl was beautiful, but she was just potential. You're the woman that potential became. The words settled around my heart like a warm blanket healing wounds I didn't even know I still carried. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt seen not as someone's mother or someone's wife or someone's burden, but as myself. What happens now? I asked. James smiled. That same devastating smile that had made me fall in love with him when the world was young. Now we figure out what the rest of our lives look like. Together, if you'll have me. As I sat in his beautiful kitchen full of good food and possibility, I realized that sometimes the tornado that destroys your old life is just making room for the life you were always meant to have. Living with James was like discovering a version of myself I'd forgotten existed. The first week was awkward, tiptoeing around each other like polite strangers sharing space. He gave me the entire guest wing of his house, a bedroom larger than my old living room, a private bathroom with a soaking tub that could fit 2 people, and a sitting area overlooking his gardens. I felt like I was staying in a luxury hotel, afraid to touch anything or leave too much evidence of my presence. But James was patient in the way that successful men learn to be. And gradually, I began to relax. He had a housekeeper, Maria, who came 3 days a week. But on the other days, I found myself cooking for him. It started small, making coffee in the morning, preparing simple lunches. But James appreciated everything with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been eating catered meals and restaurant food for decades. "This is incredible," he said one evening, savoring the pot roast I'd made using Harold's mother's recipe. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this in years." "It's nothing fancy," I protested. But inside I glowed. When was the last time someone had appreciated my cooking? Marcus used to complain that I made the same 5 dishes over and over. Sophia had once suggested I try more contemporary flavors for family dinners. James shook his head. "It's perfect. You're perfect." That word perfect should have made me uncomfortable. I was 67 years old with gray roots showing and laugh lines that had turned into permanent creases. My hands were spotted with age, my body soft in places that used to be firm. I was anything but perfect. But when James looked at me, I saw myself reflected in his eyes as someone beautiful, someone worthy of love and attention and gentle care. We fell into routines that felt as natural as breathing. Morning coffee together on the back porch, where James would read business reports and I would watch the birds at his elaborate feeders. Afternoon walks around his property where he showed me the gardens he'd planted himself and the greenhouse where he grew orchids as a hobby. Evenings were for talking. We had 50 years to catch up on, and we did it slowly, carefully, like archaeologists examining precious artifacts. I told him about the lean years after Harold died when I'd worked at the department store to make ends meet. About the loneliness of widowhood, the way people treat you like half a person once your husband is gone. He told me about his business, how it had grown from a small construction company into a development empire with projects across 3 states, about the women he dated over the years. Intelligent, accomplished women who looked perfect on his arm at charity galas, but never made him feel complete. There was this one woman, he said one evening as we sat by his fireplace, rain drumming against the windows. Rebecca, she was a lawyer, brilliant, beautiful. Everyone said we were perfect for each other. I felt a stab of jealousy that surprised me with its intensity. What happened? I proposed to her, he said quietly. On Christmas Eve 5 years ago. Big production restaurant overlooking the city ring from Tiffany, everything she'd said she wanted. And she said yes. We planned the wedding for the following Christmas. But as the date got closer, I kept having this feeling that something was wrong. Not with her. She was everything anyone could want in a wife, but with me. He paused, staring into the fire. The night before the wedding, I called it off. James, no. What did you tell her, the truth? He looked at me, then his gray eyes serious. That I was still in love with a girl I'd known 50 years ago, and it wouldn't be fair to marry her while my heart belonged to someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow. You called off your wedding because of me, because of the memory of you, because of the possibility that someday, somehow you might need me, and I'd be here waiting. I stared at him, this successful, handsome man, who could have had anyone, and tried to process what he was telling me. That's crazy, is it? He leaned forward, taking my hands in his. Is it any crazier than you keeping my business card in your wallet for 50 years? He was right. Of course we were both crazy, both living with ghosts of what might have been. But somehow, against all odds, our particular brand of insanity had brought us back together. 3 weeks into my stay, Marcus called. I was in James's making dinner and humming to myself. Actually humming something I hadn't done in years when my phone rang. Marcus's name on the screen made my stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Hi, honey, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mom. His tone was strange, carefully controlled. I've been trying to reach you. Your phone keeps going straight to voicemail. That was true. I'd been screening my calls, not ready to deal with whatever guilt or obligation Marcus might throw at me. I've been busy doing what Mrs. Patterson said. You moved out of the extended stay place weeks ago. Where are you living? I looked around James's beautiful kitchen at the fresh flowers he'd brought home that morning, at the expensive wine glasses sitting on the counter. I'm staying with a friend. What friend, Mom? You don't have any friends with money. His assumptions stung, partly because it had been true for so long after Harold died. I'd let most of my friendships fade. Too tired and too proud to maintain relationships when I had nothing to offer in return. You'd be surprised, I said coolly. There was a pause, and I could practically hear him processing this information. Mom. I think we need to talk. Sophia and I have been discussing the situation, and we think maybe we were too hasty. Maybe you could stay in our guest room for a while. Just until you get back on your feet. The offer that would have meant everything to me a month ago now felt hollow, insulting even. What changed your mind? Another pause. We realized we might have been too focused on our own needs. Family should stick together. What he meant, I realized, was that he'd probably heard through the neighborhood gossip network that his mother wasn't living in a shelter anymore. Someone had mentioned seeing her with a well-dressed man in an expensive car. Marcus was curious, and curiosity had made him generous. That's very kind of you, I said. But I'm perfectly happy where I am. Mom, you can't just move in with some stranger. It's not safe. What do you even know about this person? I know that he's never made me feel like a burden, I said quietly. I know that he values my company and appreciates my cooking and tells me I'm beautiful every single day. The silence that followed was so long I thought he might have hung up. Is this some kind of relationship? Marcus finally asked, his voice tight with something I couldn't identify. Disapproval, embarrassment. I don't think that's any of your business, I said, surprising myself with my directness. Of course it's my business. You're my mother. I'm worried about you being taken advantage of. Like you took advantage of me. The words came out before I could stop them, sharp and bitter. Mom, that's not fair, isn't it? You turned me away when I needed help most. You chose your girlfriend's comfort over your mother's safety. And now that you think I might have found happiness somewhere else, suddenly you're concerned about my welfare. I could hear Sophia's voice in the background, but I couldn't make out the words. Look, Marcus said, his tone shifting to the reasonable, patient voice he used when he thought I was being difficult. Why don't you bring your friend to dinner on Sunday? We'd like to meet him. No, I said no, Marcus. You don't get to approve or disapprove of my choices anymore. You gave up that right when you kicked me out. We didn't kick you out. We just thought you thought about yourselves just like you're doing now. I took a deep breath, feeling stronger than I had in years. I'm happy, Marcus. Truly happy for the first time in longer than I can remember. If you want to be part of my life, you're welcome to try, but you don't get to dictate the terms anymore. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of finally saying what I should have said weeks ago. James found me a few minutes later, standing at the kitchen window and staring out at his gardens without really seeing them. Everything all right? He asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back against his chest, letting his warmth chase away the chill of dealing with Marcus. My son called. He wants to meet you. Good, James said, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. I've been looking forward to meeting him. I turned in his arms, studying his face. You're not worried about what he'll think, what he'll say. James smiled, that confident smile that had first made me fall in love with him. Wanda, I've been waiting 50 years for you to come home to me. I'm not about to let anyone, not even your son, make you doubt that you belong here. As I stood in his arms in that beautiful kitchen, I realized he was right. I did belong here. Not because of his money or his house or his success, but because of the way he looked at me like I was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. For the first time since the tornado, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The wedding was nothing like my first one. When I married Harold 48 years ago, it was all about what other people expected. White dress church ceremony reception at the community center with a DJ and a cash bar. We invited everyone we knew and several people we didn't particularly like because that's what you did. You performed the ritual for the community, not for yourselves. This time, James and I did exactly what we wanted. The ceremony took place in his back garden on a crisp October morning, 6 months after that phone call in the McDonald's parking lot. The minister was an old friend of James's, and the only witnesses were Maria, the housekeeper, and Thomas, James's business partner and best friend for 30 years. I wore a simple blue dress that James said brought out my eyes, and he wore a charcoal suit that made him look distinguished and handsome. No fuss, no fanfare, no stress about impressing anyone. Just two people who'd found each other again after half a century, promising to spend whatever time they had left together. Marcus came to the wedding. I'd debated whether to even invite him, but James convinced me to try one more time. He's your son, he said simply. You'll regret it if you don't give him the chance to do the right thing. So I called him 2 weeks before the ceremony. James and I are getting married, I said without preamble. October 15th at 200. You're welcome to come, but Sophia isn't invited. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Mom, he finally said, you barely know this man. I've known him longer than I knew your father when I married him. That was different. You were young then. Yes, I was. And I made choices based on what I thought I should do, not what I wanted to do. I'm not making that mistake again. Another pause. What about Sophia? She's part of my life. If you can't accept her, I can accept her. I interrupted. But I won't be manipulated by her. She made it clear that I wasn't welcome in your home when I needed help. Now she's not welcome at my wedding. Actions have consequences, Marcus. He showed up alone, looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget used to be. He shook hands with James politely, made appropriate small talk, and even managed to smile when the minister pronounced us husband and wife. But I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he took inventory of James's house, his car, the obvious markers of wealth. This wasn't about supporting his mother's happiness. This was about positioning himself for whatever might come next. After the ceremony, as we sat around James's dining table, sharing the simple lunch Maria had prepared, Marcus cleared his throat. "So, James," he said with the kind of forced casualness that immediately put me on alert. "Mom mentioned you're in development. That must be interesting work." James smiled, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. He recognized what was happening, too. It has its moments. I'm in insurance myself, commercial properties mostly. We should talk sometime about potential synergies. Perhaps James said mildly, then changed the subject to something safer. But Marcus wasn't deterred. Over the following weeks, he began calling regularly, something he hadn't done in years. He'd ask about my health, my happiness, how I was adjusting to married life. But somehow, every conversation ended up circling back to James's business, James's investments, James's plans for the future. The worst part was watching him try to charm James during our occasional dinners together. Marcus had inherited his father's natural salesmanship, and he deployed it like a weapon, regaling James with stories designed to show what a devoted son he was, how much he'd always appreciated everything I'd done for him. It was all lies, of course. Revisionist history designed to position himself as the loving child who deserved to benefit from his mother's good fortune. James saw through it immediately, but he was too polite to say anything directly. Instead, he'd squeeze my hand under the table during Marcus's performances, a silent reminder that he understood exactly what was happening. Sophia, meanwhile, had apparently decided that if she couldn't beat me, she'd join me. She started sending little gifts, expensive candles, gourmet chocolates, a silk scarf that probably cost more than I used to spend on clothes in a year. Each gift came with a card expressing how happy she was that I'd found love again, how she hoped we could start fresh. "She's trying to buy her way back into your good graces," James observed one evening as I unwrapped yet another peace offering. I know I said setting aside the cashmere throw she'd sent. The question is, what does she think she's buying? We found out 3 months later. Marcus called one evening while James was at a business dinner, his voice tight with forced concern. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't be offended." My stomach clenched. "What is it? Have you and James discussed what happens to his assets when well in the future?" There it was, the question he'd been building up to for months. "Marcus, that's an incredibly inappropriate thing to ask. I'm just worried about you. You're older now, and if something happened to James, I want to make sure you're protected, that you're not taken advantage of by his business partners or distant relatives or whoever." The audacity of it took my breath away. The same son who'd turned me away when I was homeless was now concerned about my financial security. "My financial situation is none of your business," I said coldly. "Of course it is. You're my mother. If you need help when I needed help, you turned me away. Remember, you and Sophia decided I would be too much trouble, too disruptive to your perfect little life. Mom, we've talked about this. We made a mistake." "Yes, you did. And now you're making another one." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with anger. But underneath the anger was hurt. The deep, persistent ache of realizing that even now, even after everything, my son saw me as an opportunity rather than a person. James found me crying in our bedroom when he got home from his dinner. "What happened?" he asked immediately, crossing to wrap his arms around me. I told him about Marcus's call, about the months of transparent manipulation, about my growing certainty that my son would never see me as anything more than a potential inheritance. James listened without interrupting, his jaw growing tighter with each detail. "I'm sorry," he said when I finished. "I'm sorry your son is too selfish to see what an incredible woman his mother is. I keep thinking I failed him somehow, that if I'd been a better mother, he'd be a better man." James cupped my face in his hands, his gray eyes serious. "Wanda, you raised him the best way you knew how. He's made his own choices as an adult, and those choices reflect on him, not on you." 2 weeks later, James called Marcus and Sophia to the house. He didn't ask me first, just announced at breakfast that he'd invited them for dinner, and that there were some things that needed to be said. I spent the day nervous, uncertain what James had planned. But when Marcus and Sophia arrived that evening, I saw a side of my new husband I'd never witnessed before. James Morrison, the successful businessman, was formidable in a way that made grown men reconsider their positions. He was polite, gracious even, but there was steel underneath the courtesy that would have been clear to anyone paying attention. "I wanted to talk to you both about Wanda," he said once we'd finished Maria's excellent dinner and moved to the living room, "about your relationship with her, and about certain expectations that seem to have developed." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do." James's voice was pleasant, conversational, and absolutely implacable. "You've been very interested in my business, my investments, my plans for the future. You've been treating your mother with a level of attention and concern that's remarkably different from how you treated her when she actually needed your help." Sophia started to speak, but James held up a hand. "I'm not finished. I want to be very clear about something. Wanda doesn't need your approval for our marriage, your permission to be happy, or your protection from fortune hunters. What she needs, what she's always needed, is for you to love her unconditionally, the way she's loved you your entire life." Marcus's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger. "I do love my mother, do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you love what you think she might inherit. You turned her away when she had nothing, and you're courting her now that she's married to someone with money. That's not love, Marcus. That's opportunism." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Sophia was staring at her hands, her face pale. Marcus was glaring at James with undisguised resentment. "I think," James continued quietly, "that you need to decide what kind of relationship you actually want with your mother. If you want to be part of her life because you genuinely care about her happiness, you're welcome here anytime. But if you're here because you think there's something in it for you, you're wasting everyone's time." After they left, Sophia practically dragging Marcus out the door before he could say something that would make things worse. James and I sat in his living room, holding hands in comfortable silence. "Was I too harsh?" he asked eventually. I thought about it. About the years of taking Marcus's calls out of obligation rather than joy. About the way he'd made me feel like a burden rather than a blessing. "No," I said finally. "You were honest. Maybe for the first time in his life, someone told him the truth about his behavior. That was 8 months ago. Marcus calls occasionally now, but the conversations are different, shorter, more genuine, less calculated. He asks about my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the animal shelter. He doesn't ask about James's business anymore. Sophia has stopped sending gifts. I don't know if we'll ever have the close relationship I once dreamed of having with my son, but we have something honest now, something real. And maybe at 68, that's enough." This morning I woke up in James's arms, my husband's arms, in the bedroom that's become ours, in the house that's become home. Sunlight streamed through windows that overlook gardens we tend together, and I could smell the coffee James makes every morning before I wake up. At 68 years old, I'm happier than I've ever been. Not because of James's money or his beautiful house or his success, but because someone sees me, really sees me, and chooses to love what he sees. The tornado took my old life, tore it apart, and scattered the pieces. But sometimes I think, as I watch James reading his morning paper across the breakfast table, destruction is just another word for renovation. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually needed. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, first, love gets a second chance to become forever love. The business card I carried for 50 years is framed now, sitting on James's desk in his study. A reminder that some promises are worth keeping even when it takes half a century to fulfill them, especially then. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.